Listen, you do not need to beat the market. What you need to do is you need to stay out of your own way when it comes to building wealth, investing, and compounding everything that you've earned. So, look, this whole thing right here is about why the best investors are dead. And this all comes from a study that was done by Fidelity, that was done to find out who the best investors were, who had the best performance in the market. And the answers from this study were pretty clear. Some of this is potentially kind of um, hearsay, but the point for sure stands. So, what this report ended up finding was that the best investors are either deceased or were completely unaware of their investment accounts. Why is this? It's very simple. We're going to dive into this in just a second. But just think about it logically for a second, right? When you're not constantly looking at your portfolio, you're not panicking about what's going on in the markets, you're not overreacting to some headline about what just happened in the Middle East or somewhere else in the world, or chasing the next hype, right? Buying Nvidia at the very top, or buying IPOs, right? Things like that. Um, the people who are either deceased or unaware of their investment accounts have no way for the emotional side of investing to interfere with their processes. So that's why the best performing investors are either dead or have no idea, or have lost access to their investment accounts. The same thing would go if you were to listen to someone in like the crypto space, like someone who lost access to their crypto, and then later found it, is going to be someone who's performed 10 times better than pretty much anyone else in the crypto game who's had to go through the extreme volatility of that market over the past decade. So, the reason this matters so much is because peak fear almost always aligns with the bottom of a market. So, when you're selling during panics and you lock in losses, right, you're actually doing the exact opposite of what you want to do in those types of scenarios. If you stay calm when the market retraces, let's say you get a 20% dip, kind of like what we got at the beginning of this year, if you stay calm and you actually invest in those times, that is how you beat the market. Okay. And you don't need to beat the market. But the only way to do that is to actually do less. Okay. Trade less, invest, don't sell in these downturns, and actually just put in more or add to your holdings when you get these big pullbacks and when everyone is afraid. So, just as an example, for anyone who was around in 2020, this happened at the highest level possible that you can even think about. Like this really happened. And so what happened is you had a huge crash based upon a narrative. Okay, there was not necessarily an actual change in the data at this point in time in March 2020, but there was this narrative of, hey, the world's going to shut down. No one knew what was going to happen. Right, it was peak uncertainty. All right, and that's really, those are the best moments. That's what I'm learning this year as well. Is when the uncertainty is high. Okay, that's so different than, for instance, what happened in 2008. What happened in 2008 wasn't about uncertainty, right? What happened in '08 was an actual structural issue in the market. Okay, that was real, that had already passed at that point as well, right? This was something that people were looking at for years when you read about what was happening during the '08 crisis. Whereas in 2020, what you had was a narrative that was forward looking, okay, that was saying, hey, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Same thing this year, by the way. We don't know what's going to happen in the future with tariffs. What happens? You get a bunch of profit taking. Okay, the big boys are just taking profits. Okay, the market's coming down, and all of the people who are in the market who are getting scared, they're getting afraid, and they're selling. I promise you, at the very bottom. And I'll never forget, because this was such an incredible time. I was in university I had already been investing for a few years. I've already been paying attention to all this. Um, and I had friends telling me that their parents were selling their retirements and liquidating their investments at the bottom of the market because they were so scared. And now, mind you, the thing that was happening right there was unprecedented in terms of society, or at least we had not seen that in our lifetime. We're going to talk a lot more about uh, the psychology of markets and the way that generations kind of deal with market uncertainty and turmoil differently. But for the adults at the time during 2020, they've never seen anything like this. Couple weeks and you got a 20 to 30% decline. And just looking here, what happened right after that over the next 12 months? What happened? The market surged. Okay, at the end of that year, from from trough to peak, you were up about 95% in the Nasdaq. Okay, the Nasdaq doubled from the bottom. Oh, I'm back. Uh, so once again, if you had invested at the bottom, every dollar that you put in over the next 12 months would have been worth two. Now, if you sold at the bottom, you basically cut your net worth not only down by the 35% that it was down, but you missed out on that doubling. So you then once again have kind of left yourself in half of what you could have gained. So horrific time for anyone who made emotional decisions, and people really don't talk about this, but that happened. Um, and it happens over and over and over again, especially when you have these moments, once again, of peak uncertainty. So watch out for peak uncertainty and recognize that those are moments when you actually have an advantage over the big funds and the big institutions who have to take profits, right? When there's uncertainty about the forward looking data, and you can actually come in and buy because you don't have a fiduciary responsibility to someone else. All right, let's move on. So there's an actual psychology to this. Let me try to get myself out of the way. This is something that is deeply wired in our brains. All right. So the first concept that you need to understand about your psychology is the concept of loss aversion. So the truth is, losses, and this comes to money, and this comes to other aspects of life as well, feel twice as bad as gains feel good. What that means is, just as an example, you need to make $2 to feel the same amount of good that you would feel bad about losing $1. There have been studies that have been done that we are risk averse. The risk aversion ratio is about 2.5 even to 3.5. And this was a study done by Daniel Kahneman. We'll talk about him a little bit later. He's an award winning economist and came up with the concept of behavioral economics. And so, understanding the psychology and the way it affects us, it's two clear things that happen. First off, people will sell their winners really early. Why? Because you don't want to lose. You want to say that you won. So, when you buy something and it goes up in value, those are the things that you actually need to hold on to, okay, because they're likely to continue to go up in value over time. That's just the data in most scenarios, right? And then people hold on to their losers for too long. Why? Because you don't want to accept the loss because it hurts. It hurts really bad. So you're working against your psychology here, and that's loss aversion. The second concept we want to talk about really quickly is negativity bias. Okay, so our brains are also wired to prioritize negative information. This is something that is a piece of our evolution. Okay, because you are more likely to survive when you take information in as something that's potentially negative, right? You need to pay attention to the threats in your environment. Okay. You're going to be better off if you perceive something as a threat than if you don't perceive it as a threat and it is a threat, right? That consequence is fatal versus if you perceive it as a threat and it's not, you're going to be fine, right? So our brains have evolved to actually process negative information first and intensely as we've seen. So panicking isn't some character flaw unless you don't know this, right? Um, unless you do know this, excuse me. So knowing this, now you can avoid the pitfalls of your brain, of your wiring, and actually make better decisions. But it's not a character failure to panic. This is evolutionary programming, and you just cannot ignore it. You have to understand that this is how your brain works. So Charlie Munger, one of the best ever to do this, he passed. I think it was last year, 2024. May he rest in peace. He told us the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. Now, just as an example of why that's so important, just an obvious in your face example that you can't ignore. Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger's business partner. Okay. His net worth over time. Uh, this stopped at age 87, this graphic, but he's now 94, and that number that you see at the end of the chart is now over $130 billion. As you can see, obviously he was doing very well for himself at early on in his life, right? Let's see. He was at 7 million at 35. He had hit 600 million at 53. But what you'll notice here is towards these later years is actually where all the real growth happened. So let's look at just for instance 66 to 72. What's wild, right, is these numbers are just so massive. And I love this graphic because not only does this show the power of compounding, but it really shows exactly how large, right, this amount of wealth that he has is. Um, I think today we classify like rich people in a category, but like this is a totally different category of wealth. But anyways, sorry to diverge. Um, all of that compounding, all of the biggest amount of growth happened at the end. Okay, going from 600 million to 1.4 billion from 53 to 56, right? That's 600 $700 million difference, right? $700 million in that 3 year period now is from let's see 66 to 72, 6 years. So even if you just doubled it, that's like 1.4 billion again is what it would have been back then. But now, no, that 1.5 billion is now $15 billion that's being added to his net worth in that 6 year period. And so, anyways, just as an example, right, of how compounding happens over time, we're going to dig deep into what compounding really is about. But I just want you to see this graphic of how important it is. Let's say you weren't at 7 million by 35, even if you just had a fraction of that, right? These are the kinds of numbers that you can start to see later on in your life. Okay. Um, so, how do you actually invest like the best? Some really quick, real tips. Log out. All right. Log out of your investment accounts. If you need to log into your investment accounts for whatever reason, hide your balances. Most platforms have a way for you to hide your balance so that you can't see the actual numbers. Once again, this is actually something that's rooted in psychology. You don't want to see when you have losses because when you see that you have losses, you are much more likely to act on that. And you don't want that. You want to do everything in your power to develop the habits, okay, that prevent you from even doing that. So just don't log in. And if you do, because you just have to, maybe you need to add money, just hide your balances. Don't look at what's going on in there. Everything that's going to happen is going to happen over a long time frame. So the most important thing is that you don't let your psychology work against you by seeing the red in your account. Log out of social media. Okay, Twitter, for instance, I completely cut Twitter out of my life. I check Twitter uh, if I ever do on Saturdays, and I check specific accounts. I don't scroll it. Okay, I look for specific accounts, what it is that I'm looking for something specific that they've done throughout the week, and that's it. Don't scroll social media looking at all the crazy stuff that's going on. Same thing for financial news. You're watching Fox, you're watching CNBC. I promise you, I've been doing this for a long time. Everything that they're telling you is already priced into the market and or is not going to help you make better financial decisions. That's not their job. They are not there to help you make financial decisions. They are there to actually literally play into your psychology, get you to do things that you shouldn't be doing. And that's quite frankly what news, unfortunately, is really there to do. They're there to get your attention. All right. And once again, negativity bias is what they're tapping into. They know that you're going to look at when things are going bad and you want to see, and you're going to get all hyped up. You're going to talk about it. You're going to make decisions. And unfortunately, it's not that they're trying to get you to sell your investments. It's just that their business model is built upon the same psychology that forces us into making poor investment decisions. Period. Now, the other thing that you should do is you should systemize your investing decisions. So you need to automatically dollar cost average. That is the best way, all right, over time to make sure that every month you have, and most investing platforms have this set up now where you can deposit $100 a month or whenever you get paid, just make sure that you're adding to your investment accounts. That is going to make sure that over time you're able to compound on your money. And like we said, that's pretty much the most important thing. And the last thing you want to do ever is to interrupt that process. So every single month, that consistency of you doing that, after 1 year, it's not going to make a big difference. After 5 years, it's going to make a bigger difference. After 10 years, that difference between that first 5 years is even bigger. After that 15 years, that next 5 years, the difference that it makes is even bigger. Once again, we'll do a full video on compounding so you can look at it and see it visually. But DCAing, dollar cost averaging, if you don't know fully what that means, just look it up, is the best way to ensure that you get wealthy over time. Another thing that you can do is separate your accounts. So, look, some of us love to trade and like do stuff with our money. Okay, fine. You want to do stuff with your money? Here's what you need to do: create separate accounts. You have one account where you put your fund money. All right, and keep that small, right? Make that 10% of what you're investing. If you're investing $100 a month, you put $10 a month into that account. If you're investing $1,000 a month, you put $100 a month into a play account. You want to play with options. You want to, mess around in the markets. Like, keep a separate account for that. And most platforms, once again, have ways for you to set up a separate account where you can do all of that kind of fun stuff. Thirdly, if you're going to make a big decision with your investments, journal it, write it down. Write down not only what it is that you're thinking, right? Write down what you're thinking, write down what you're feeling, okay? And I promise you, write down what you're feeling. It is such a hack. We want to talk about habits and hacks that allow you to maximize your financial future. Write down your feelings, okay? Because what happens when you write down your feelings, and this is all cognitive behavioral science, you start to acknowledge what you're feeling, and you start to, those feelings, that anxiety, that fear that you have, it actually starts to subside once you actually write it down. So don't skip that part. I think if anything on this entire presentation that actually matters, that's the thing that matters. Journal before you make a big financial decision, and that could be investing in something new as well, right? A lot, the best investors, all the hedge funds, they don't just throw money at stuff. What they do is they take their time, they write out a thesis. Some of them are going to write down their emotions. The best ones are going to do that. And then they decide whether or not they're going to go through with making that decision or not. So that's what I got for you today. This is how I'm going to start doing a lot of presentations like this, kind of just talking about not only money, but also just developing habits and understanding our psychology so that we can make better decisions. Those decisions are going to lead to us creating better habits for ourselves and morphing into the identity of the person that we want to become. So subscribe to this channel. Definitely please like this video if you got any value out of this whatsoever. There's one last thing I do want to talk about, just in case this stuff is interesting to you and you want to dive super deep. Here are a few books that you can read. Number one, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Most of you may have read this already. If you have not, you definitely need to read that book. It's a super light read, super fun read, and it packs a punch. Like, I'm not saying it's a bad read or that it's easy. No, it's just really, really, really good, really digestible information. The second one, if you want to get a little bit more technical, A Random Walk Down Wall Street by Burton Malkiel. I'm not sure how to say his name properly. That's another really good one. It's just slightly more technical. Still, like, a good, understandable, digestible read. I think that it's good for just having a better understanding of like the history of markets and a lot of the principles that once again we just talked about. He breaks down the different theories of how markets work, efficient market hypothesis, things like that. Moving on, you have Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. That is a lot of what this presentation and a lot of what the future presentations are actually going to be about. He really dives deep into the psychology of making decisions in general. This isn't necessarily just about economics. I didn't know that because he's a Nobel Prize winner for behavioral economics. Him and Amos Tversky, who unfortunately passed before Daniel was awarded the Nobel Prize, so he did not get it. But, anyways, that book is a much tougher read. I only recommend that if you're really into reading or if you're really into psychology. It's really tough, but it's good. It's a good book, and it applies to so much more than just investing, which once again is what this whole channel is all about. The next one is The Misbehavior of Markets by Benoit Mandelbrot. I'm not sure how to say that properly either. A lot of the writers and the great thinkers are not American in this space. But anyways, that book is all about the fractal nature of markets. Uh, Benoit was actually the founder or the he coined the term fractal geometry. It's hard to say that someone founded something that naturally occurs. Um, but anyways, also a very tough, almost scientific kind of read. But if you're really into markets, you're really into the psychology of markets and the history as well. It's a great read. It'll get your mind going, and you'll start to understand a little bit better about the psychology and the mass psychology of how we interact with markets. But anyways, once again, uh, like this video, subscribe. I've got a lot of incredible content like this, but even better coming out. And if you want to know how you can actually get in touch with me and work with me, leave a comment down below, and I'll make sure that I put all of this information to get in touch in the description of this video. And just let me know if you're interested in this stuff. If you're enjoying this at all, just let me know. I'm curious. Other than that, thanks for listening, and I'm going to see you on the next episode.